I've often said on this show that the ruling class in this country, the elites who dominate the institutions, are woefully out of touch with the forgotten majority of hard-working, law-abiding, tax-paying people who have to live with the consequences of the decisions that are made in Westminster. And tonight we have yet more evidence of just how big this gulf has become. With an exclusive news story for GB News, JL Partners has revealed new polling that brings to light what everybody in this country has known to be the case for a very long time. Day after day, we bring you more and more stories of foreign criminals and illegal migrants avoiding deportation for all sorts of nonsensical reasons given by our courts. But almost every time, the reason lies with the notion of human rights. Well, brand new bombshell polling today, exclusively for GB News, reveals something really shocking, which blasts the establishment consensus apart. Most British people, a large majority of British people, overwhelmingly support deporting foreign criminals who commit serious crimes, even if they're at risk of torture in their home countries. Yes, you heard that right. How often do we hear that we cannot deport convicted paedophiles, drug dealers, gang members, because their human rights may be breached upon returning to their home country? Well, guess what? The British people don't care anymore. They have simply had enough of the chaos. They've had enough of the carnage. This polling shows that a consensus-busting 81% of British people in this country support the policy of deporting all those people found guilty of crimes like rape or paedophilia who are not from this country. Indeed, only 6% objected to the idea of deporting those bad apples from these islands. Rarely on any political issue do we achieve this kind of agreement. But on deportations, we are really there. Never before has there been such support for a given policy and such a gulf between the people who rule over us and those who have to live with the consequences of their decisions. This polling shows that 89% of Conservative Party voters support the idea of deportations, 85% of Reform UK Party voters, 80% of Liberal Democrats support this policy of deportation. 79% of Labour Party voters, that's Keir Starmer's own voters, support this policy of deportations, and 72% of the Greens support it too. Practically everybody appears to agree that deporting foreign criminals is a good idea, even if they face human rights abuses. Of course, there is one group that does not agree, and that group is the liberal establishment class. The new elites are people who have risen to the top of our institutions, who make these bizarre decisions that we all have to live with. They are the people who espouse this defunct liberal consensus that's been imposed on us now for 30 years. The luxury belief class are people who preach beliefs like open borders, like letting foreign criminals stay in our country and in our communities, but who will never suffer the consequences of that. It's not their kids who are going to become victims of the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. And it's not them or their friends who will have to live next to housing for multiple occupants, HMOs, which are crammed full of mainly young men from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan and elsewhere. No, it will be the hard-working, forgotten majority in this country who have to live with all of those things. And this opinion polling really shows how we are now approaching what I think will be a really important watershed moment in this country, a moment in which everybody can see just how out of touch the people who rule over us really are. Now, if we want to call ourselves a democratic country, a democracy, then I think it's time that we execute the will of the forgotten majority and we begin to deport all of these illegal migrants and foreign criminals in our country while securing our borders and slashing the overall level of net migration to as close to zero as we can get. As ever, let me know your views tonight at gbnews.com/yoursay. Of course, you can reach us on X at GB News, but I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by the man who conducted that poll, from the company that conducted that poll, JL Partners, James Johnson. James, thank you for joining us this evening. Now, I'm sure as a pollster, you will be more than aware than most of this gap between the people at the top of British politics and ordinary voters, ordinary people who have to live with the consequences of their decisions. So what is the take-home point from this poll for you, James? What do you think it's telling us about that gap at the heart of British politics?
Well, firstly, that the gap is vast. As you just read out there, we're not just talking about one particular party support or one particular part of society. We are talking about resounding big majorities saying this isn't acceptable. Now, just to give a context here, you rarely get to these numbers in polling. You usually say 55%, 60% is a strong result for something. Up at 81%, that's in line with the amount of people in Britain that have a positive view of the NHS. This is sort of real national consensus levels here. And I think it shows something very simple that we're seeing around the world, which is a sense that if foreigners, if immigrants, people who come to this country are seen to break that social contract with the country that's let them in, then the simple answer the British public are giving is, well, look, send them back. No Brit actively wants people to suffer torture or human rights abuses. Of course not. British people remain compassionate, but their view is that it's a case of you shouldn't be in this country. You're not our problem if you're committing, heinous crimes such as rape and paedophilia, as we asked in this question. So I think it's a huge gulf, and I think it's universal.
Now, looking at the papers this week, James, we've had a number of stories that I think have hammered this point home. We've had the revelation that illegal migrants who arrive in the UK are basically often going straight to work with fast food delivery companies and are moving straight into the black economy and gaming the system. We've obviously also recently had the news that we are heading towards a national inquiry into the rape gangs. Again, another example of people who arrived in the country fairly recently and then went on to abuse the rule of law in a horrendous way. Where is all of this taking democracy in this country? Because, as you say, there is a social contract, which is that everybody who comes in, we expect to play by the rules. There is that famous British sense of fairness. But where is this taking democracy in this country? That's what I'm worried about. The people are just looking at all of these crazy stories, the ECHR stories, the paedophiles who we can't seem to get out of the country, the Class A drug dealers. Where's this leaving our democracy, James?
Well, I think that what we are seeing is a real strain because people who want things done and they feel like common sense things that should be reflected by government, they just don't see those being done. And therefore, when you get that, if you have that for a few years under one party, people go, OK, we'll try another party. But if you get decades of establishment parties not listening to these concerns, then you end up with democracy fraying at the seams. And that's why I think it's so important. As a pollster, I don't want to suggest that we're saying, the public think this, therefore government should do this. That's not good politics. That's not good governance. But polling and the public opinion is important because on some of these things, if you repeatedly don't listen and act and try and address these concerns, voters will simply go elsewhere. And sometimes
Sorry, on that point, James, while we've got you, we're short on time, but we are going to be discussing in a moment another bombshell poll in British politics showing that Reform UK is on course to become the largest party at the next election. Is all of this feeding into that? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. In my focus groups again and again, people who used to vote Conservative, used to vote Labour are throwing their hands up in the air and saying, I'm going to vote Reform because there's no other choice. One very quick statistic I want to give you, Matt, and leave you with. This is not just white voters in Britain. Black and ethnic minority voters, 72% of those also think that illegal migrants committing these crimes should be sent back. It's a cross-society view.
Absolutely. Well, that's James Johnson from Jail Partners with us tonight, friend of the channel and the show. Thank you, James. Let's turn to my panel now. Assistant comment editor at The Telegraph, Poppy Coburn, and contributing editor to Novara Media, Michael Walker. Michael, what do you think will be the view on the left of politics when people sit down and read this number that 81% of Brits not only back deportations, but back deportations of foreign criminals, even if it leads to potential human rights violations?
Well, there's always something you've got to be careful of when you're looking at polls. And this is sort of a very standard conversation in social science, which is how you phrase a question really matters. So if you phrase a question, is it good that we have a rule whereby we don't deport people to countries where they might get tortured, right? I imagine, I don't know what the result would be. I haven't done that poll, but I imagine it'd be a lot more positive than this. If you put the word paedophiles and rapists in any kind of question, you were going to get an overwhelming response. I'd quite like to know the proportion of people who would like the death penalty for paedophiles, for example. I think it would probably be quite high. So I have to say, There isn't a single result in here that I find remotely surprising,
but
and I'm not sure what we should infer from
the
that.
polling has consistently shown over the last 10, 20, 30 years that on crime and law and order, the British public are much more hardline than the people in Westminster.
I mean, that's always been the case. I mean, that's been the case with the death penalty, right? So the death penalty was got rid of way before there was majority support for that. And I think I think it might have just crossed over, but it was very recently whereby the majority of the British public wanted to bring the death penalty back. And that was always put forward as an example where politicians shouldn't just be led by popular opinion.
Poppy Coburn?
I mean, I think it's pretty dangerous, though, if you don't pay attention to public opinion in something like this. And if I wanted to steel man the left-wing case for this, right, I would look at the way that the world is moving and say human rights is not really a doctrine that has much popular support anymore. When you have these cases of where mass immigration is facilitating this constant barrage of news stories, where these really horrific crimes are being committed against the British population that didn't want the migration in the first place. So I would want to steel man it. I would say, look, let's try and keep the human rights doctrine, but we surely cannot be defending every single case where it's a paedophile, where it's a gangster, where it's a rapist. And what I think frustrates people is when people are so kind of boneheaded about this and go, no, in every case the law applies. In every case we've got to defend this principle. It is kind of defending the indefensible.
And in fairness, Michael, that is what Labour are doing. As Poppy Coburn says, Vet Cooper saying now they're going to look at reforming Article 8 of ECHR. I personally think they're gaslighting the British people because it's not just Article 8, it's Article 3 that is used by foreign criminals and illegal migrants to stay in the country. But Labour, like 9 other countries in Europe, are now saying, OK, we're going to have to look at the human rights architecture around migration. I would argue people like me and people in that poll, we're winning this argument on the ECHR. We are saying, actually, we have to reform and revise this architecture to get it more in line with what those people in that poll think.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the sort of current policy is misaligned with public opinion, and that is a problem. I think taking the most extreme case one can imagine, which is sort of paedophiles, and then making policy on the basis of that is not necessarily wise. I also do think, I think I agree with Poppy that there are certain cases when you read what the judge has decided and you think, if you, Mr. Judge or Mrs. Judge, really care about these laws staying in place, maybe have a little bit more discretion when you're using them instead of constantly sort of overreaching in a way that the public would see that. So I think sometimes there could be a bit more self-reflection from the judiciary on this question. Whether what we should do is just rip up the whole Human Rights Act, I think that might have implications that we haven't fully thought about.
I would say not getting rid of human rights has implications that we haven't fully thought about. I think if you want to look at the rise of right-wing populism in Europe, and again, I'm taking the perspective here, look, I'm a sensible, centre-left guy. I want to keep my politics around for as long as possible. You are just setting yourself up to fail here. If you're going to have mass immigration at the scale that we've had in the last few years, you can't rely on judges to use discretion. They don't. They're judges. They think they're above it all because they kind of are. It's too dangerous to keep applying this outdated 20th century framework that actually doesn't really defend rights very well.
I mean, this is all building up, isn't it, to us leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. I would go back, I think I agree with Poppy that the whole point about the Brexit vote, for example, was people saying, look, get control of the borders, lower immigration. The elite class decided, no, actually, we'll do the opposite. So now you can feel out there in the country people saying, well, OK, you didn't want to listen to us in 2016. You can listen to us now when we send Reform UK into government, for example. It just feels as though on all of these big issues of the day, migration, borders, security, and the left says, oh, that's just a bit racism, that's xenophobia. People out there are saying, no, we're going to make you listen to us. You can either correct the system or you can keep ignoring us, and then we'll force it through.
So, where I stand on, I suppose, where the direction of conversation is going, is I don't think it makes sense to say if you want to limit immigration, you're racist. I think there are some people who have sort of said that and it's been unhelpful. Where I do see sort of a blurring of red lines, which I am uncomfortable with, is I see a growing, especially in the online right, a growing questioning of the idea that Britain is a multi-ethnic country, of the idea that someone who is black or brown can't be English or can't be British.
Well, they could be British, but they might not necessarily be able to be English.
So do you think that, Sturridge or any black England football player is not English?
I think there's a difference between Britishness and English.
So you don't think
Britishness
you think only white people can be English?
Not necessarily white, but Britishness is a nationality, it's a state nationality. Englishness is an ethnicity. It's an ethnic group. It's not necessarily a state identity in the way that Britishness
So is Marcus Rashford English?
Well, I don't know about Marcus Rashford's family history, and anybody.
Well, I mean, he plays for England.
I think you can understand what Matt's getting at, right? Which is it's kind of difficult with the UK because of the way the UK is structured. So England's a country, and it's also part of this transnational thing. But like, there's obviously ethnicity as part of this conversation. I understand why you're concerned. I think bad faith actors are taking this too far. That's what happened when you give these people an inch, right? They take a while.
Absolutely.